Some 6 weeks ago, I spoke about the new normal. Of course, it means what will happen after this time that we've had of great suffering in our world. And it was to be in contrast to what we might call the old normal, the way in which we lived our lives. I mistakenly thought that I had invented those two words. I thought, this is a rather original way of talking about what might happen after our time of lockdown and so forth, the new normal. Well, I discovered, of course, in recent weeks that the new normal is mentioned often within the political realm and cultural realm, and they're not necessarily following me. I also noticed when I went on to Google that the new normal has been used for about 10 years, and it was originally, seems to have come out of the area of psychology, where people talked about the old normal and the new normal. The new normal, of course, was a way in which one could be in the world in a different way from the way one was in the past. Well, the new normal does fit today. We're not in that particular place. We're in some hiatus. We're in some kind of place which is in between two epochs, perhaps, of our civilization. And when I say that, I mean the civilization of the world. We are in lockdown because of a virus that we still don't know how it really occurred, and certainly we don't really know how we can get rid of it. Perhaps a lazy belief in the value of everything being normal has brought us to this social place. There will be years of analysis and blame when we finally emerge in some form or other, and we know whether it not be weeks or months or even a year or so, when we emerge from this devastating time, that there will be much analysis and blame in terms of what happened and how this actually happened. But remember the days of the old normal, of what we would have called normal life. Life has been very good to some people. It's been fairly good to others. It's been not so good for a number of people, and it's been downright awful for many. And so therefore we should not look to what was in the past as if it was some glorious time, but recognise that for many millions of people, what we have had in the past has actually been a devastating experience and a difficult time for them. I wrote in the update about some of these issues, and we often hear economists and epidemiologists talking about health and wealth and other issues, of course, as well, and how we might deal with this particular time and what might emerge from it and when it will actually end eventually. That's normal for us. That's what we do as human beings. And most of us, we can't believe that life will not change, and we can't believe that it will necessarily go in a new way. It's much easier to think of the old way. And perhaps, as I mentioned a little earlier in my prayer, that we sometimes lack the imagination that we need in order to think of a new way. Psalm 46, which Barbara read a little earlier. Nations are in uproar, kingdoms fall. God's voice is lifted and the earth melts. Come and see what devastation God has brought upon the earth. Powerful words, words that can be related to the very days in which we're living at the moment. They're words that make us uncomfortable, particularly when we place it against the God of love, the God of justice, which follows just in the first few verses after that passage. But how else will there be change in the 21st century? How else will we change our thinking? We know that there is an unsevered umbilical cord between suffering and joy, despair and hope, doubt and fear, and even love and hate. You can't have one without the other. And so we need to find ways in which we live with these paradoxical opposites, for they will still exist after this time we've spent together. We are in a time of humongous suffering. Many of us are spared from the pain. For many of us, it's a matter of just being within our homes with the ones that we love, and hopefully love a bit more from the time we spend with them, learning how to use Zooms, streaming our services, taking a trip once every couple of days to buy some food, and taking that walk around the block that we're encouraged to do. But that really is no relationship, has no relationship to the millions around our world who have suffered so greatly. Those who have died and the grief of their families. Those who don't know when a person goes to hospital what the outcome will be. In many ways, they are suffering on our behalf. They are suffering for us. Greater love has no one than those who lay down their lives for another. I suppose most often no one lays down their life voluntarily for another, but rather it happens that we give our lives, whether it be in war or in peacetime, or as it is, in the midst of this terrible virus that we're facing, people's lives are laid down. And there is a relationship between their life being laid down, the sacrifice they make, and our lives. And so whether it's on the sodden fields of Europe or Asia or the Middle East, or whether in a hospital bed, on the street, in a country, in the world far from us, when one person dies in the name of universal death, he or she, young or old, dies for us. Greater love had no one than this, that they lay down their lives for another. Professor David Rancoon of Cambridge asked the question of this pandemic. We keep hearing that it is a war. Is it really? People are stuck in their homes and their fights are limited to the domestic sphere. There is talk of national unity. There is talks that politics should not be as it usually was, and that there is a new age that is emerging. No, this is not a war. It is a placement of our centre being shifted within our world. As the writer of John again says, I no longer call you servants, because servants do not know the master's business. For everything I have learned from the Father, I have made known to you. This is not a time, and nor has the past been a time, for blind obedience. Love dies when we follow blindly. Love is not giving of one's life thoughtlessly, unthinking or foolishly. We give our love to that which our hearts are committed. And that's what the author of John is writing 3 generations after the death of Jesus. He could say, the fruit you bear will be compassion, hope, faith, truth, love, and this harvest will demand pain, suffering, poverty, fire, and disease. Do you know how this is to come about? I don't know. But I do live in a world in which I know that we must not waste the suffering that we have had, that it must take us into a new way of being together in this world. I'm not so naive as to believe that war will suddenly end. Pray God if it did. But I do desire that this dreadful episode in the history of the world will not be wasted. Our desire to forget the cost and go back to normal is often very, very strong. I'm sad about the wars that we have fought. The Franco-Prussian War, the World War I, World War II, the Vietnam War, Korean Wars, the war in Afghanistan and Iraq have caused such pain. To us, yes, but to the 100,000 people who died in Iraq. Is war the best way in which we can bring about a wholeness for humanity? I'm arguing the great advance in humanoids wasn't the discovery of war, it was the discovery of speech, or rather the development of speech. That's what we use in devastating moments. That's what we're using now as we communicate through technological methods. We're using speech. But it is not just words that we use. It is the words of love that can bring about new and exciting ways of being in the world. I don't mean the sentimental way in which we use love, not that there's anything wrong with that, but like the ocean, and its depth is so immense, it remains unfathomable. That's what our love can be, unfathomable. Our imagination can be so deep. And the words of John, of talking about the way in which love can be centre of all we do and all we act, and out of all of those things, love becomes the centre and all flows from it. Imagination is essential. We need to think deeply. We need to recognise that our existence will be a new normal, another way of being together on this planet, and introduce it into our culture, into our politics. I've heard recently a number of YouTube pieces where love, politics and culture have been used in the same sentence. What a new way of thinking of our world. New way? It was 2,000 years ago that Jesus suggested, or rather commanded, that that would be centre to all we do, to love God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, and your neighbour as yourself. Amen. And our next hymn